You're listening to episode 11 of the D6 podcast.
Here's the encouragement I give you. The shortest distance between your child's heart, your grown child's heart, and Christ is you.
Parents need to own that they are the primary disciplers of their child.
Our goal in parenting is not for our kids ultimately to get a great education, as good as that is. Our goal is not for them to be great athletes. Our goal is not for them to go on great dates and find a great husband or a great wife. Our goal is not for them to have a great career with a great job, making great money. Our goal is for them to love a great God.
You're listening to the D6 podcast. Here's your hosts, Ron Hunter and Jeremy Lee.
This is the podcast that helps you build an excellent family ministry in your church. Thanks for joining us again. Ron, this is going to be a big day with Timothy Paul Jones, one of the smartest dudes out there.
Absolutely. You know, everywhere I go, he's kind of like this Christian ministry guru rock star, and people love him, and he has quite a student following. He's had years and years of teaching at Southern Seminary, and he's a tremendous speaker. Every time we put him in a room at any conference, the room is never big enough.
And what he's going to be talking about today is how to encourage parental engagement in the home with discipleship, and specifically, he's going to talk a lot about apologetics, which, in my opinion, is one of those terms that apologetics sometimes can be used as a hammer instead of being a subtle thing that is used to invite people towards the faith and kind of fill in some of the blanks so they're free to have faith. Sometimes people can misuse apologetics. So Timothy Paul Jones is going to talk in this interview about how parents can teach kids how to defend their faith in the right way.
Yeah, you know, the key thing on this that I hope our listeners are taking away from this, apologetics can be intimidating, and they believe that only the ministry leaders can teach on it. And Timothy, Paul, you, other guests that we've talked about, the common theme you're going to hear on most of our podcast interviews are how do we strengthen our ministries at church, and how do we strengthen our parents to keep that ministry going throughout the week. Please, listeners, hear that transferable. How do we get our parents to buy in and become more confident in this area?
And you're going to hear when we introduce Timothy Paul Jones that he's a seminary professor. But when I hear seminary professor, I think sometimes this guy who's going to use 50-cent words that I'll never understand. That is not him. He's going to speak real clear to you.
Absolutely.
It's going to be very understandable. Okay, so after the break, we're going to come and we're going to hear from Timothy Paul Jones, and he's got a lot of great stuff for us, specifically on how we can encourage parents to engage in that discipleship process with their kids. We'll see you after the break.
Are you looking for the right conference to attend this year? The D6 Conference is a family ministry conference designed for your entire ministry team. Come hear from over 30 speakers and network with churches that share your passion for reaching families. Family ministry isn't just another program. It's one of the most important things your church can do to make a difference in your city. At the D6 Conference, you'll be inspired and equipped to take your family ministry to the next level. To learn more about the D6 Conference, just go to d6conference.com.
Hey everybody, this is just such an honor to have Dr. Timothy Paul Jones with us, and I want to tell you a little bit about him before we get going. Timothy Paul Jones lives here in the great city of Louisville with his wife and 3 daughters. You've been here 2 decades now? Mm-hmm. That's amazing. 2 decades. That's a long time. He's had the privilege of leading several congregations as pastor and in associate minister roles, and now he serves which I'm excited about, he serves as a professor and associate vice president at one of the largest seminaries in the world, and I do say maybe I attended their Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and he invests his time and mentoring a rising generation of God-called ministers to the gospel. And he edits the Journal of Discipleship and Family Ministry. He writes books in the field of apologetics and family ministry. And he enjoys spending time with his family and meandering along city streets. He likes visiting baseball parks. Here's what we just had this long discussion about this. This man drinks French press coffee now. He's given up the diet drinks, which I'm proud of him. He loves restaurants and cooking, and he serves in children's and family ministry at the East Campus of Sojourn Community Church, a fabulous church that I've followed for years. And so we're just so excited to have you with us.
Great to be here.
It's going to be so awesome here. D6 is just a great experience, a great conference, and I'm so thankful for your investment here in ministers over the years. And we're going to focus this session around this big idea. I want to make sure that we always kind of hone in on a thought. We're going to talk about how to encourage parental engagement. And I know you get that. I know you talk about that a lot. I know you teach on that a lot. But so let's just jump right in, and we'll let it roll. You led a session. You have led, or you're going to lead here at D6, a session on shaping a faith that lasts, which is focused on helping parents teach apologetics to their child. Let's unpack that, like what that's about. Like, how would you teach apologetics to your child, and help folks understand, help these ministers that are watching this understand, why is it important, and why should parents why should they even worry about it?
Well, it's the overarching idea behind that is children are unlikely to remain faithful in a faith that they can't defend.
Yes.
I mean, that's the most important thing. That's the big picture of it. If they can't defend it, they're not going to remain faithful within it. And we live in a world that is increasingly resistant to any form of orthodox Christian faith. And so as parents, one of the things we have to do is make certain that when they get a challenge to their faith in college from a professor or at the water cooler at work, wherever it may be, when they get a challenge, it's the second or third time they've heard that challenge, not the first.
Wow.
In other words, what I'm really encouraging parents to do is to make sure that you've raised that question before the college professor does.
Yes.
That you've raised that question with them before they hear it at work from a skeptic, somebody who's just read a Richard Dawkins book and it's all evangelistic about the atheism at that point. That's what we're wanting, is to make sure that parents have raised the question first so that it's not the first time. Because here's what I hear from students, from youth, and from college students over and over is, I got to college and I never heard any of these questions. I'd never been allowed to ask the questions. And suddenly they start asking the questions and I didn't have an answer. And then there's somebody there who seems to have the answers, but they're the wrong answers.
That's right.
And so what we want to make sure is that we have raised the questions before they end up in a hostile environment. That we raise the questions in a safe environment. So one of the things I'm really trying to work toward engaging with parents on and pressing parents toward is to prepare themselves so that they can then prepare their children. Because here's the fact, whether they're meant to or not, we have often, especially in youth ministry, we've taught a very moralistic perspective on things. Where we just tell them, just do good, do better. Jesus helps you do better. When you get into college, when you get out in the workforce, that idea of just do better and let Jesus help you, it's not going to be sustainable. It's not something that's going to last. It doesn't last the onslaught of those that are against and have this resistance toward Christian faith. It's not going to last in that environment. So we want to give people a faith that lasts. And a faith that lasts is going to be one that we've challenged and sharpened and strengthened and helped people to see things in light of God's big story before they ever get out of in the world, in college, and all of that.
You talked about, you said two things there. You said we need to raise these questions. We need to preemptively, talk about things that are controversial.
Exactly.
Almost.
Exactly. Yes.
And as parents, talk about, for a parent, how do they gain the courage then to do that? And what are some of the key elements of doing that for a parent, addressing the topic?
Well, I think first off, one of the things that I really encourage from the church side to help parents do is for us to recognize the parents need this training as much or more than their youth.
That's right.
Okay, so we've got to recognize that in most instances, the parents aren't raising these questions either. And so we've got to just step back and think through that. And so one of the things I've encouraged churches to do is to establish kind of a reading guide for parents to read alongside their youth.
Yes.
And so books like, some books that I've recommended have been, there's a book by a man named Sam Alberry which is God anti-gay? That's the question that their students are going to have to deal with. Well,
Yes.
frankly, parents need to grapple with that too.
That's right.
And so for them to read that alongside their youth, to be able to read it together and talk about it together. One of the issues is just simply the authenticity and reliability of the scriptures.
The Bible.
And a year or so ago, I was teaching at D6 on this topic, and somebody asked me, well, what book should we read? And I realized all these books are really too hard for people.
That's right.
And so what I did is I went out and wrote a book. And so it's out now called How We Got the Bible. And it's intended for youth to be able to read.
How can people get that Bible? That's a
that book. They can go to my website, timothypauljones.com. Okay. Almost any bookstore is going to have How We Got the Bible. And it is a book that is full of color, full of pictures. It's very simple. It's about 6 or 7 chapters. It's very short.
Yes.
And it's for parents to be able to read alongside their youth, to be able to understand the authenticity, the integrity of God's word, and to believe that. And it prepares students. The whole point is it literally interacts with some of the different topics and the different texts from people like Bart Ehrman and so on like that their students are going to encounter in religion classes in college. It preemptively deals with those questions so that the parents can be able with their student to have talked about these things beforehand.
I love that idea of the together, and I think you'd agree. Like, it's okay for parents. Let's go ahead and give even ministers that are watching. It's okay to look in a child's face and to ask the question and say, "What do you think about it?" And then go, "Let's learn about that together."
Right, exactly. Let's both recognize we don't have an answer to this question, but there's somebody that does, and let's talk about this. Let's wrestle with this.
And that's one
together.
of my favorite things about my theological education. When I went there thinking everybody had the answers, like every professor had all the and what I learned is, and parents don't get this because they get intimidated. Well, the more you continue on, the more like the really wise people will admit quickly. The wise teachers say, "I don't know." Let's find the professor here that does know. Let's ask them the question. So it's like, mom and dad, it's okay. It's not having all the answers. It's having the willingness to learn and to process.
And to do this in community together. So we can do this. I mean, this is so important that they don't have to go run off and find these answers alone.
Yeah.
They can actually engage with somebody on these questions and answers.
100%. I just love that concept. But you've learned a lot. Like, well, just tell us, what have you learned as to why parents today are not engaging with their children at home? Let's kind of talk about that, because this all funnels into that fear of like, I don't know if I'm ready to talk about this, so I'm going to go grab this other person to tell my kid about this.
So 2010, 2011, I set out to explore and find the answer to that question.
Yeah.
Why aren't parents doing this? And so in the first round of surveys we did, hundreds of parents worked with churches and got this massive survey together. And we had 2 things that seemed like contradictory information. And I thought at first something had gone wrong in the statistics because we had contradictory information. It's well over 90% of the parents said, "I know I'm totally responsible to disciple my child. I am the person that bears primary responsibility." So well over 90% of parents said this.
Yes.
On the other hand, 1/3 of the parents were partially disengaged, and another 1/3 were fully disengaged from their children's spiritual lives. So about 2/3 were at some level disengaged for their spiritual lives. So I had 2 bits of data here. One says we all know we are, and then the other says we aren't at the same time. So we're trying to work through this data. And so we did a series of interviews, a series of surveys with these parents, and 3 very particular bits of information rose immediately to the top, and we realized these are the 3 factors. For a very small but significant chunk of parents, the problem was telling. And what I mean by that is they'd never been told, I'm supposed to do something with my children.
True.
They may have had the hunch of that in their heart, but they'd never been told by the church, the church staff, or anything like that. But that was a minority. There were 2 two other factors that rose to the top, that about 90% of parents were in one or both of these categories of those that are disengaged. And those two factors were training and time.
Wow.
We had a significant chunk of parents who said, I'm willing to do this. I know I'm supposed to. I've been told to do this. I have no clue how to do this.
Yeah.
And as we explored with these parents, we realized you cannot get too basic. You cannot go too basic with these, because they were realizing, I don't even know what a family devotion looks like. I've never seen it. I have no clue. And so it's a training. That's an issue of walking with these parents and actually at the most fundamental and basic level, even showing them. Literally, I've had churches who had a strong number of parents who needed this training to say, okay, what you need to do is get your church staff, some of the families up on stage, and do a family devotional on stage, because they have no clue. They don't even know what you're talking about.
Show them
on that, because I would have the pastors. They would say, I've told them about this. I've told them how to. And I said, well, what did you do? Well, I mentioned it in a sermon. Do family devotions.
That's right.
And so it's like, no.
Yeah.
They need more than that. They need somebody to show them exactly how. And so whatever you're wanting them to do, to have them trained for that, to show them. So that's this huge chunk. The other group of parents was time. They said, we want to do this, but we don't have time to do it. And so there's two different approaches that both need to go hand in hand for dealing with that. The first approach is sometimes we need to look ourselves in the mirror at church and say, we are the problem.
Yes.
We are the problem. We have overscheduled things in our church to the point that we are causing them not to have enough time to do this.
Yes.
So that's one of the big factors, I think. We have to look at our calendars and say, maybe we're overscheduling. But there's a flip side as well. Recognize that these parents may be, and often are, thinking it takes a lot more time than it really does.
That's true.
So here's one of the things that
100%.
I've done with these parents, and it's really been helpful with churches, is you see this sometimes on instructions. Here's where I stole the idea from instructions for putting together cheap bookcases, okay? So I'm letting you know something. This is family ministry wisdom from cheap bookcases.
A manual.
It's set on there. It has a little box on there. Here's how long we estimate it will take you to do this, like 44 minutes or whatever it may be. So what we started doing is putting that on the things we provide for the parents. Because these parents that feel too busy, they schedule everything. And so to say, okay, this that we're wanting you to do with your child is going to take 35 minutes, and we want you to put it on your schedule, because here's what happens when you do that. If you try to flip it around and hammer on them and say, you all are too busy, stop.
Slow down.
That just puts guilt. It gets nowhere.
Motivates by shame.
So we flip it around and we say, you know what? We're just going to say schedule this, and we're going to tell you how much time it takes. And if we do that, then the parents say, I'm too busy. I need to cut back on things.
That's right.
We help them. What we're doing then is working not from the side of guilt and shame,
but from the
we're
positive
working from
side.
the positive side of saying, let's value this.
Here's what's
let's value it enough. And schedule it. Put it on your schedule and value it.
Awesome.
And so steal an idea from your instructions for your cheap bookcases.
The things that drive
and
me
put
crazy.
put those in to what you're doing with the parents, and help them to schedule the time specifically to do what you're wanting them to do.
Oh, that's gold. That's worth. Oh, I hope everybody out there just grabs onto that. Like realistic expectations, goals, positive reinforcement. We should be the most positive organization in the world. The church, we're hope dealers, and so we paint the pot. Let me do this. In your blog, you wrote a blog, 3 truths and 3 tips to engage with families in your church. So 3 truths and 3 tips. You share 3 truths about these parents to help ease some frustration for children's and youth ministers, and you kind of told us, like, here's what they're dealing with. They're dealing with time. They don't know what to do. If you had to say, if they're listening to all this and they go, hey, where do I start? Like, where do I get going? Because they may be thinking about the apologetic side. They may be thinking about that. You've been in the church setting. Just kind of help these pastors understand, okay, I want to start. What can I do? And how can I avoid being frustrated with the process?
Right. So in that, the three truths that I want people to understand as they approach this to ease that frustration is that, number one, the overwhelming majority of the parents in your ministry already know they're supposed to be doing something. And so sometimes pastors just hit that guilt side of that and don't realize these parents are already feeling, most of them, I know I need to do something.
Yeah.
So that's probably not the main emphasis we need to have. And I see, especially from a pastoral side, a lot of times that becomes the main emphasis. That shouldn't be our main emphasis. They already know this. But a second one is the truth I mentioned earlier, is that the parents aren't doing it. So there's the bad news and the good news there. The bad news, they aren't doing it. The good news is they know they're supposed to be doing it. But here's the blessing that we need to approach it with. Most parents are willing to be trained. That's one of the things that we forget in this is we get either frustrated with one hand, or we think, well, just go ahead and do it on the other hand. Most parents are willing to be trained, and yet in the surveys I've done, about 68% feel like their church has not ever trained them to do this, to do anything with their kids. They've been told, but they've never been trained in most instances. There are a handful, as I said earlier, that haven't even been told, but most, about 68% say, I just want to be trained, and I just don't know what, and my church hasn't done this. So that's kind of a basis. Those are these truths. But there's 3 tips I want to add, I think, that help parents and help pastors on that. And that is simply, number one, train more than you tell. Train more than you tell. Because if we just keep telling, that just, as I said before, it increases this level of guilt, and we get temporary gains but long-term loss when we do that.
Don't you think that guilt, too, is double fueled? Our guilt as we carry around some of that guilt. Because how many times in class do you have somebody who's, and when I was in seminary, I was on staff doing ministry and then learning. So I would just come over, I was like, they don't get it. They don't get it. They don't get it. It's not just the guilt they have, it's the guilt that we have.
Right.
They're like carrying around with us.
Yeah, they feel like, and this is one of those ones, sometimes I'm saying to them, okay, read the first chapter in Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Life Together. Go back to that, because that's that pastor that's feeling that frustration and guilt. There's a great section in there about where we bring our own visionary ideals and try to impose them on the community. In that Bonhoeffer talks about there, and that's really what the pastors are dealing with. And so they end up kind of telling, instead of saying, I'm going to train. So you can invest a short time in telling and get short gains but long-term losses. Or you can invest a lot of time in training, and in the short term, you're not going to get very many gains, but you will get long-term gains instead of the short-term gains. One of the things I tell students, if nothing else, remember this: the early bird may get the worm, but it's the second mouse that gets the cheese.
Come on.
So take your time.
We want the cheese.
Take your time on that. So just go ahead and take your time sometimes. So that's the number one thing I'd say is train more than you tell. The other ones I'd say is train at times when parents are already present. One of the things we want to do sometimes is like, oh, this is going to be hard to change Sunday school. This is going to be hard to change something because it's going to take more time to do it. And so like, okay, well, why don't we just set up a new program on Tuesday nights? For it's like
a parent needs.
Just exactly what they need is one more thing. But look at the times when do you have the most parents already present? Is it when they drop their kids off for camp and you can grab them at that time and say, hey, let's get together, and I know we need to sign medical release forms, but let's also talk through some discipleship things.
Let's show you how to engage when your kid gets home. We did that this time, and it paid off immensely.
It does. And so look through your week and say, maybe it's Sunday school is when they are. And so once a month, the last 10 minutes of Sunday school becomes some training for how you work with your kids. I mean, there's all these, don't try to add new stuff. Train when the parents are already there. And the last thing is to remind parents with love and grace who their children really are. Now, here's the thing I want to drive home and hit really, really hard. The purpose, the value of your children and their identity is as missionaries to generations yet unborn. They are missionaries. They are supposed to be missionaries beyond your lifetime. And remind them that if they stand beside their children by God's grace in eternity, it won't be as parent-child. It will be as blood-bought brothers and sisters in Christ, that the true identity, the most essential identity of your child is not your child, but is a potential or actual brother or sister in Christ. That's who your child really is. And parents, what they forget is my child is an eternal soul who will outlast the rise and fall of all the kingdoms of the earth. That's who my child is.
That's right.
And they don't have that vision. They have a vision between from now to next Tuesday's soccer game. I mean, it's just, if we can make it from now till soccer game, then we're okay as a family. And I get that. I mean, we've got 3 children ranging in ages from 8 to 19. I totally get that. So I understand that. But at the same time, I, in my own life, had to step back and remind myself sometimes, who are my children really? Their essential identity is not my child. Their central identity, their central who they are is a potential or actual brother or sister in Christ. That's who they are.
That's such, again, the right goals lead to the right direction, lead to the right results.
Yes.
And that's so encouraging. Thank you so much for just investing in next generation leaders. And thank you for just all the work that you're doing in this. This was incredible. I wish we could keep going, but we can't. We're going to get in trouble if we don't stop. So we want to say, first, thank you for being with us. If you want to learn more about Timothy Paul Jones, and you need to, go to timothypauljones.com. They can do that. And we just got the new Twitter hashtag, but we had the old one on here. Let's make sure we get that. It's at Dr. Timothy P. Jones on Twitter. And I know you're active on there because I've seen you share and seen you interact. So I know they can get there and connect with you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Great to be with you again.
What's it like to be a member of the D6 Leader Network? Well, what if I told you that you could hire an intern for your ministry that would plan your sermon series each month and create amazing graphics to help promote it? What if that same intern helped you train your volunteers by writing an online teacher training every month that includes a fully produced video without you even having to touch it? What if that same intern created a fully designed parent resource that they can actually use to help them spiritually lead their family? What if that same intern was able to get you access to every main stage talk, breakout, or interview D6 has ever done at their D6 conference for your own training and development? That would be the best intern in the history of the world, right? Well, becoming a member of the brand new D6 Leader Network is like hiring an intern to do all of that and more for around $1 a day. We make your life easy. We make awesome easy. If you are a minister, you can go to d6leadernetwork.com to learn more.
All right, welcome back. And I told you Timothy Paul Jones was going to be awesome, and I hope you enjoyed that. For me, one of the things from that interview that I think is going to be good for you guys is that you got transferable and actionable tips you can use. That's what this podcast is all about. So many thanks to Timothy Paul Jones for being our guest. And Ron, we've got somebody else on the show that's going to be awesome today. Tell us about our next guest.
Absolutely. We have Joel Teague, and he is a missionary, a leader in France. And something I learned early in my ministry is that the leaders in Europe approach evangelism very differently than we do here in America. People will often ask questions, actually even go through a Bible study for weeks or months before they make a decision because they approach it very rationally. They've had a lot of influence from those Western thinkers, very strong socialistic or humanistic approach, and they're very distrusting of God. I want you to hear Joel's approach because we as ministry leaders in America can learn a lot because the generations coming up right now approach it very much like a European mindset. So let's listen to Joel Teague. I'm with Joel Teague. He and I have been at actually 3 conferences in the last roughly 6 months, 2 here in the United States and 1 in France that we were together for, and you are speaking at the conference I'm speaking at right here in Florida, and I'm really excited that we've been able to connect. You were born in the United States, but you grew up in France, the son of a missionary, and you've dedicated your entire life, you and your wife Lydie, to the work there in France. And I wanted to talk to you about Je Pense And I want you to tell our listeners, what is je pense? And then I've got a follow-up question related to that approach.
Great, thank you. Yeah, je pense means I think about it. And that's the whole concept. In the French situation, French worldview, there's so many barriers, so many things they don't understand, and they've been taught so much that there is no such thing as a God, and that if people believe in God, it's just an old superstition and things like that. And our je pense event is specifically designed for them to get them to think about the possibility of there being a God.
Okay, let me kind of jump in here for a second, because what I'm hearing you say is je pense is an apologetic type of an event, but it's not just to teach the way we have traditionally done in America, a defense of our faith, but you're using apologetics as an outreach.
Yeah.
I've seen some pastors do this in the States, and I think it's a win. Tell us why that's effective.
Yeah, well, for one, you won't get an opportunity to defend your faith if nobody asks you. And so we decided to go on the offensive mode and go out there and tell people this is what we believe, and we have some good reasons to believe that. And that's been really effective because they've never had an opportunity to hear those answers in France, a straightforward answer to those questions. And to be invited to come and hear why we believe is something very new, and it's actually attractive to them because they say, well, maybe they do have some reasons, and at least they're curious to come and hear what we would have to say for ourselves. And we, instead of hearing the answer just, well, you just have to believe, they're happy to see that there's some people that actually have thought about it and are willing to give some answers to all these tough questions that you hear in apologetics nowadays.
Now, I know a little bit about je pense, and you do not have it in a church.
No.
You do not have it on a Sunday, so to speak.
No.
And yet you have pretty good-sized pretty large crowds. And you have worship music. Tell us, when a person walks into je pense, what do they see, what do they feel, what do they experience, and what's a couple of the questions that you have answered during a je pense in France?
Well, they're really scared to come because we're considered as a cult by many people. The ones that do build up the courage to come, they'll sometimes park 2 blocks away and gradually work their way, or they'll stand up in front of the building and wait, see if nobody's around, they'll walk in. But what we've experienced is that when they come in, over and over we've heard them say that they saw people full of joy, full of life, and even people have said they have something that I don't have. And that's amazing because we're running around trying to get everything ready and stressed out, and
chaos,
as always before an event. And through that, the Spirit has showed them joy and peace, and that's just pretty incredible. So they walk in, they'll see a little coffee bar where they can get a soda or a coffee or whatever for free, and they can just hang out and discuss a little bit. And they'll see the main stage, just a full band, lights, just like a normal concert. So it's a conference concert type event because that's something that's culturally acceptable and an environment they feel comfortable in. So that's just why we went for that. And so they just see chairs, a stage, people up there, and a coffee bar where they can get a drink for free and just hang out.
I've seen what in pictures you've done when you and I've talked. This is a huge preparation. I mean, you take weeks in preparation, but actually inside the venue you rent out, you spend 2 or 3 days prepping that stage, the lights, the whole atmosphere, so that they can feel comfortable coming in and hearing. Tell us a question they might hear you deal with when they're in there in the je pense.
An apologetic question?
Yes.
Probably the main question for French people is, how can you believe that there's a God and a good God when you see all the evil and the suffering in the world? They see there's evil and there's suffering. And then they hear people say, oh, we believe there's a perfect God. So they think, well, he should have created a perfect world. And they can't make any sense of that. They say there's a perfect God that created this world and it's really bad. That doesn't make any sense. And since they don't know an answer to that, they consider it doesn't make sense, so there can't be a good God.
Now, I know too, your next step is when you have completed that, you ask them to possibly sign up or opt for a follow-up study so they can find more answers rather than just what they can get in that. And I assume you have a good response to that. Tell us that, and that's our last question as we kind of wrap up our time here.
Yeah, that's extremely important. The events will get them to think, but we need them to have an opportunity to ask questions, discuss, and get into the Bible and really understand what the gospel is all about. We get pretty good response, but the people are scared. So there's a lot of work. It takes time for them to feel comfortable enough to sign up. And when they do, they come to a discussion group. We hang out wherever, somebody's house, a restaurant, a cafe, get a drink, and we just go over these issues. And we've seen great results for anybody that has the courage and the determination to keep coming regularly. Many of them come to Christ.
That's great. Yeah. Joel, thanks for letting us do this interview.
Thank you.
Apologetics as an outreach, what a great way to lead with Christ. Thank you for what you do.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, so now we have this great feedback from Joel. Good job on that interview, by the way. Way to go. And now I want to talk for a second. This podcast is going to be coming out, Ron, in July. And July is that season for a minister when they're getting ready to prepare for the fall. I know when I used to travel and speak at retreats and camps, I would always get a ton of bookings for the fall right at about this time of July, because that's when the ministers are starting to think, oh man, I got to start planning for the fall. So as we're getting ready to plan for the fall, let's talk to them about the D6 Leader Network and how can the D6 Leader Network help these ministers take their family ministry to the next level in the fall as they're preparing.
Yeah, if you're listening to this podcast, it's because we love hearing from these ministry leaders, these experts in these specific fields. And the D6 Leader Network is going to open you up to just literally numerous videos. These podcasts, that you've done in the past, there's just so much content that's going to allow them to continue to be coached. If you're like me, I believe in what's called a reverse mentoring. I need to go find people who can speak into my world, who can make me think differently, stretch my thinking, and equip me to approach the next season of life.
And, the tagline for D6 Leader Network is we make awesome easy. And I think one of the things that I love about it is the approach is you're trying to take things off of a minister's to-do list. Like you help them with sermon graphics. You even give them a head start on planning the sermon. You help them with teacher training emails and videos they can just send to teachers, and teacher training is kind of done.
And it all looks like it comes
ways
from them, Jeremy. That was the brilliance. And, you had kind of helped coach us through that principle. And I love that. I mean, our ministry leaders are enjoying because they look like they've done a lot of prep and homework to give to their teachers and their parents.
Yeah, we've got a great group of ministers in a kind of our first round of membership. And we're going to be opening that up on even higher level at the D6 conference. But it's not too late. If you're listening to this podcast and you want to check out the D6 Leader Network, you can go to d6leader.net. Not necessarily meaning for this to be a commercial, but I was just thinking about the fact that it's July, and I know you guys are thinking about the fall, and you're figuring out what you're going to invest in to take everything to the next level. And D6 Leader Network is definitely it's totally worth that investment, in my personal opinion. Well, thank you guys for being with us. We'll see you next Tuesday. Ron, do you know who we'll have next Tuesday?
We do. We have an interview you did with Scott Rubin, and you got to tune in to hear. Jeremy and Scott are very close friends. It's very evident from this interview. And like so many of our guests on this podcast, Scott just continues to ooze wisdom in these questions that Jeremy's going to ask him. And then we have Mike Williams. He's a professor of history, and I know what you're going to do there. You're going to go yawn, but I tell you what, the same way that we hear Timothy Paul with that excitement and passion about family ministry, Mike Williams is going to challenge us as leaders to think differently about how we approach historical works to shape our leadership approach to everyday life.
Okay, well, as always, if you get to this point of the podcast and you've listened all the way through and you're hearing this, I want to just say a genuine thank you for sticking with us all the way through. And remember, it would be a great gift to us if you would go on to the iTunes, if you're listening through iTunes, and leave a review there. A couple of you have done that. I was looking at that this week, and it was so encouraging. And all that does is that helps our podcast kind of move up in the iTunes rankings, and more people can hear and benefit from the training that's being given on this. So we'll see you next week. Thank you for listening. Talk to you later.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com. And if you're a minister, we invite you to join the D6 Leader Network by going to d6leadernetwork.com.